It appears that a former Trump official has been busted for voting twice. Oops. Now, of course, this was not during a general election, but it was during a presidential primary. So let me give you the details here. Matt Mowers, a now leading Republican primary candidate, had actually voted twice in the 2016 presidential primary. So that's the Republican primary. Now, the AP reported that Mowers first cast an absentee ballot in New Hampshire's 2016 presidential primary, voting records show. At the time, Mowers served as the director of former New Jersey Governor Christie's presidential campaign in the pivotal early voting state. 4 months later, after Christie basically got Donkey Konged by Donald Trump, Mowers decided to cast another ballot in New Jersey's Republican presidential primary, using his parents' address to re-register in his home state, documents the Associated Press obtained through a public record request show. So he voted in New Hampshire, then he voted in New Jersey, and now he is running a campaign in New Hampshire. So now New Jersey is his home state. He hasn't actually lived in New Hampshire his entire life, or most of his life, so he's essentially a carpetbagger, which I'm sure works very, very well. People really enjoy that. But all right, so now, here's the thing. Federal law prohibits voting more than once in any general, special, or primary election. That includes casting a ballot in separate jurisdictions for an election to the same candidacy or office. Interesting. So again, he used to work for Christie, then he switched over to Trump's campaign, and then after the general election, Mowers ascended to become a senior advisor in the Trump administration and even held a State Department post. Very, very important stuff. Now, this guy claims to be for voter integrity. Oh, I'm a voter integrity. Now, look, the irony here is incredibly obvious. It's painfully obvious at this point. This guy who's running in a party and members of a party who promised to fight for election integrity. Apparently he doesn't even believe in it. Oh, then again, it's okay if white Republicans to vote twice, even though they're not supposed to, impersonate their dead wife or mother. But hey, look, if a Democrat does it, if a Democrat does anything, even if they do it by mistake, well, then we've got to throw out not just their vote, we got to put them in prison and throw out an entire election, which is what they tried to do. Even though, again, voter fraud actually happens at a rate of a what? 0.0000014%? Something like that? I mean, you have better chances of getting struck by lightning, honestly. Such a tiny percentage of all the votes that are cast. I mean, not even close enough to sway an election. Not at all. Not at all. Now, when this story came out, reporters reached out to their campaign, and suddenly he wasn't available to talk. He really didn't have much to say. I wonder why. In a brief statement that did not address the double voting, campaign spokesman John Corbett cited Mowers' work for Trump's 2016 campaign. Quote, Matt was proud to work for President Trump as the GOP establishment was working to undermine his nomination. Matt moved for work and was able to participate in the primary in support of President Trump and serve as a delegate at a critical time for the Republican Party and country. Now, that said, we're talking about voting twice, right? So there are specific instances where you might be able to do so, and that's involved moving. So now, on that, the law's a little murky, which is interesting. Now, let's see. The AP reports that there's little chance that he will face any prosecution. The statute of limitations had passed, and there was actually no record of anyone being prosecuted under this specific section of federal election law, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures which tracks the issue. A separate New Hampshire law prohibits double voting in 2 different states, but makes an exception if someone legitimately moved his or her domicile. Well, now, all right, we don't know the details of whether or not he was actually living at his parents' house when he had registered to vote there later on. So that's why, unfortunately, they're not going to go after him. He's not going to face any sort of investigation or anything like that. And Mowers is not the latest former Trump administration official to draw a little bit of scrutiny for potentially violating voting laws, again, which is super ironic. Mark Meadows. You know Mark Meadows? He served as Trump chief of staff and was registered in 2 different states and listed a mobile home he did not own and might have never even visited as his legal residence weeks before casting a ballot for Trump in the 2020 election. He is now under investigation. Isn't it funny, though, that when Republicans do these kinds of things, when they double vote, they take advantage of laws that are a little bit murky in order to try to vote twice, or even do straight up voter impersonation, as we've seen before, fraud, they almost never get in trouble. They almost never get in trouble. And the ones that do, and I've reported on this before, check out some of my recent, my earlier videos where I had talked about the 2-tiered justice system when it comes to voter fraud. You have, white Republicans that will do obvious voter fraud and get a slap on the wrist. And then, of course, you have people that, black people, black Democrats specifically, that are on parole and were told that they were cleared to cast their ballot. And so they did and registered to vote. And then, turns out they weren't. And they end up getting 5 to 6 years in prison over an honest mistake. So that's the situation. Now, the thing that bothers me about this is the complete and utter hypocrisy. What they're trying to do is, look, they don't care about voter fraud. No, what they consider to be fraud is people not voting for them, voting for the other side. And so what they want to do is stop and pass all of these laws to stop black people from being able to vote. And the other thing is that until they are able to restrict voting, because that's what they ultimately want to do, they're going to lie, they're going to cheat, they're going to do their own fraud and get away with it, or try to get away with it. And of course, when they are caught, and they do get caught because we do have a system that does catch voter fraud. What do you think? Do you think that Fox News and conservative media, do they cover it? Do they talk about this? They say, oh my God, look at all this voter fraud going on in the villages. Oh, look at Mark Meadows. No, they don't do a segment on it, unless, of course, it's Mark Meadows defending himself from the allegations. No, they don't. They put out statements like this. This is Charlie Spies, a longtime Republican election lawyer who contacted the Associated Press at request of the Mowers campaign. He called the matter, quote unquote, silly, and said the double voting was, quote, at worst a gray area of the law and not the sort of issue anybody would spend time on. Well, it's an issue that they shouldn't also spend time on? Non-existent mass voter fraud. Because over and over, studies, audits, all of this, reams and reams of paperwork and studies on the election have proven that there is no mass voter fraud. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But guess what? The Republican Party is obsessed with mass voter fraud. They're obsessed with it. They can't shut up about it. And you know what? It's because they're doing it. They're doing voter fraud, at least. Voting twice. Mowers' own campaign even features a section dedicated to what he calls election integrity. And it states that new rules are needed to provide every American citizen with the certainty that their vote counts. J.D. Vance put out an ad today. by the way. That ad, along with pretty much asking at the beginning, are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? I'm not kidding. That's literally his ad. And then goes on to talk about how they need to build Donald Trump's border wall and how millions of Democrat voters are flooding across the border. I mean, like, that's not a dog whistle. That's a human whistle. It's not even a whistle. It's a blowhorn. I mean, they're just saying the quiet part out loud and not just saying that, they are yelling it. They're saying, yes, yes, we are racist. We are proud of being racist. We hate Mexicans. We don't want people to vote. Well, we believe in the white supremacist replacement theory that it's George Soros, which, by the way, super anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. George Soros is bringing Democrat voters over the border to take over our elections. No, it's the reason, by the way, they're not even losing elections. They're winning elections in a lot of places because they gerrymander these maps all to hell, draw their own districts, and make sure that they choose their voters instead of letting the voters choose them. And they win, and still they know that their numbers are so small that they have to pander to the worst people in the world, because the rest of the in the United States, because the rest of the people, the rest of the voting base is either super turned off, or they're essentially powerless in these districts that are being drawn to benefit Republicans. That's what's going on. It is absolutely disgusting. Screw this guy in his absolute hypocrisy on voting. Look, hey, look, either you're against fraud or you're for it. I mean, those are your rules. So why not actually practice what you preach?